So John the Baptist came to witness to the light that was coming after him. And John the Baptist said, I only baptize with water, but the one coming after me you will not recognize. He will baptize you with the Spirit of God. That he was witnessing to the way God was breaking into the world. And as such, reflecting on the prophet Isaiah, when Isaiah said that the Spirit of God, the Master, is on me, on us, because God has anointed us. He sent us to preach the good news to the poor. He sent us to heal the brokenhearted, announce freedom to all captives, pardon the prisoners. God sent us to announce the year of God's grace, a celebration of God's destruction of our enemies, and to comfort all who mourn, to care for the needs of all who mourn in Zion. Give them bouquets of flowers and roses instead of ashes. Be compassionate, love them, and care for them. We are called to witness to the presence of God in our lives and in the world. We think of Advent as a time of expectation and preparation and the waiting. But I suggest that Advent is way more than that. Advent is about responding to the invitation of God to do something in our world in a manner that reflects the light of God in profound and specific ways. We are called to witness. That is what our Advent calling is. To give witness is to break silence. It is to let go of what the response might be from other people by doing something. It is letting go of the fear we might feel on responding to injustices and inadequacies in our society. It is to acknowledge that we cannot testify to how we have experienced God in our life without expecting maybe there might be some negativity coming our way. Witnessing is not easy, especially these days. But it must be done, because there's no way we can avoid responses if we are understanding that God calls us to be witnesses. Witnessing is about pointing to the truth, which is exactly what John did. He pointed to the truth that was in Jesus, who was in God in the flesh. And what others do with our witnessing is not ours to control. It's been interesting over these last few weeks that we have been focusing our energies on education and the role of education in the world. And the more educated we are, the less likely we are to respond negatively or to have people marginalized in society. That education is a human right that all should have available to them. And yet in our own country, 2 weeks ago, I talked about First Nations people and how education was so inadequate that young people in our nation are going to school in buildings that are not heated, that are full of mold, that are less than adequate, where the resources are not available, where they receive $2,000 to $3,000 a month less than children who are going to school in Canada's south. And this is an injustice in our nation that needs to be addressed. And as I talked about that, and then last week Obi spoke to us about the work she's doing in Nigeria, and the difference that her NGO is having with young people in Nigeria, where people are frightened to go to school because of the hostilities that exist there, and yet she and her group are continuing to work bravely, taking risks in order to ensure that young children get an equal opportunity to a thorough education. Response has been interesting. I've had people say to me, why are we bothering talking about people over there? I've had people talk about, why aren't we dealing with the people in our own community of Oakville who are living in poverty and living without resources? I've had both positive and not so positive responses to say that First Nations children and people need to look after themselves. And yet, we are called to witness. Where one child suffers, we all suffer. Where one child is not given equal opportunities to education, we all bear responsibility in a nation like Canada. There are things that we can do, and we have talked about the ways in which we can respond through the Inspire campaign or Shannon's Dream campaign. I want to show you a video, a 6-minute video of a woman by the name of Cindy Blackstone, who provides us some ways in which we can participate in ensuring, as witnesses to God in this nation of ours, where young people are given equal opportunities. We give witness to the light. As we do, it's not always comfortable, and it is sometimes very painful, and it is sometimes very risky. But it is what we are called to in the season of Advent. David.
So as a social worker, you always see that you're going to the poor neighborhoods, that house on the street of the poor neighborhood that's in a worse condition. And yet when you talk to many social workers or foster parents, we often feel powerless about how we're going to help families when those factors are beyond the ability of the individual to control on their own. So we're going to go through right now 7 free ways you can make a difference in under 2 minutes. You can do it as a person of any age and as an organization, so no excuses. You can take action that will meaningfully help address some of these disadvantages that you're seeing in your practice every single day. And not only can you do it, but you can get youth in care to do it, foster parents to do it, children in your own families to do it, your service clubs, your faith groups, and join us in creating a social movement where the landscape of Canada is only one of possibility and honor for Aboriginal children and not one of disadvantage and risk. So the Caring Society has these 7 free ways to make a difference. And all of these are campaigns, but they're bound by the idea of culturally based equity for children. It's about saying that every child should get an equitable opportunity to succeed and be proud of who he or she is. So here's a list of some of the campaigns. The first one is Jordan's Principle. What a lot of people don't understand is that the federal and provincial governments don't agree on who should pay for services for First Nations children, even when those services are available to all other kids without question. And too often what happens is the 2 levels of government argue, and then the child gets left out of the mix. They fall through the cracks. Jordan's Principle is named of Georgian River Anderson, and what it says is when these disputes arise and the service is available to all other kids, the child gets the service from the government at first contact, and they can argue as long as they like about getting reimbursed later. In this way, children come first. The second campaign deals with inequalities in education. Many people are not aware that education laws from the province and territory apply on reserves, but the federal government is supposed to fund it. Shannon's Dream is named in memory of Shannon Kustatcher from Attawapiskat First Nation. And she was a child who was one of 45 children in the world to be recognized by the Nobel laureates for her action she's taking to improve the education rights of First Nations children on reserve. What many people don't know is that First Nations students on reserve get about $2,000 to $3,000 less per student per year for education funding. That means less teachers. That means no libraries. It means very little science equipment or learning resources for special needs students. On top of that, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has said that the schools on many First Nations communities are in deplorable condition. Some of them are infested with snakes, with mice, with black mold. And in Shannon's case, her school sat atop a contaminated brownfield with over 30,000 gallons of diesel fuel. So Shannon's Dream is really in memory of Shannon Kustatcher, who tragically died at the age of 15 years of age last year. But she dedicated her entire life to safe and comfy schools and equitable and culturally based education. There are now thousands of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal children, students, teachers, and citizens who are engaging in a process of saying to the government that racial discrimination against children is not a legitimate fiscal restraint measure. And as a country, we've made a decision that every child counts and no one should be left behind. The next campaign is the I Am a Witness campaign. What we have found is that First Nations children are subject to provincial and territorial child welfare laws, but the federal government underfunds severely child welfare services on reserve, and that drives children unnecessarily into foster care, simply because they're denied the services that even non-Aboriginal families receive off reserve. So after 10 years of working with the federal government to address it, even though they were running billions of dollars of surplus or spending billions of dollars to stimulate the economy, they didn't do the right thing for First Nations children. So in partnership with the Assembly of First Nations, the Caring Society in 2007 filed a human rights complaint against the government, alleging that they're racially discriminating against First Nations children by underfunding child welfare services and giving them less benefit under child welfare laws. This case is supported by over 7,000 witnesses. And by being a witness, we're not asking you to take our side. We're asking you to go through the I Am a Witness website, read all of Canada's documents, read our documents, and then make up your own mind if after several years after the apology for residential schools, the Canadian government is doing the right thing for First Nations children. The next one is the Touchstones of Hope program, which says that, when we have culturally based and equitable funding, we need to be able to use it for maximum effect. And the best people to help us understand that are community members themselves. So it engages community members along with child welfare workers, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people, in developing a vision for healthy children and then being able to implement that in very practical ways. The final one is Many Hands, One Dream. And Many Hands, One Dream is basically the same as the Touchstones of Hope, except for Aboriginal health. It really guides us in being able to have the ultimate outcomes for Aboriginal children served by the healthcare system in Canada. And in fact, one of the things we're really excited about is in partnership with the Many Hands, One Dream Coalition, there's just been a release of curriculum for pediatricians. And we're hoping to be able to spread that out to healthcare providers so that they, like child welfare workers, have an opportunity to optimize health outcomes for Aboriginal children and young people. The final thing you can do is learn more, not only as a person, but as in your family unit. Engage your children in learning about the rich history of this land that's now known as Canada. Canada is a First Nations word. It means village. And it's just one of the many wonderful legacies left to all of us from Aboriginal people that have made our country good and great. So you can find out all this information on our website free of charge at fncaringsociety.com.
So witnessing exposes what needs to be brought out into the open and in the end insists that the light will indeed shine. It is about overcoming a darkness that has hidden so much for so long. In this Advent, it's not a brief 4-week liturgical observance. I think that Advent can never be passive. It's never about just waiting. It's never about just anticipating or expecting. No, Advent calls us to witness, to be the light of Christ for ourselves in the world. Advent is a way of life. So we pay attention to these Advent themes and closely because they remind us of how expecting the birth of Jesus calls us to live and calls us to be as witnesses to the gospel. Thanks be to God. Amen.